Good morning, Sue. How are you?
I am great, Nancy. Good morning to you as well.
Good morning. And welcome to our listeners, our audience. It was so fun to meet Ruth in person last week when I was in Minneapolis visiting Westminster Presbyterian Church. I introduced myself, and Ruth came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh, I watch your sermons online, and I join you and, Sue's kind of conversations, about the sermon." And it was just so delightful to meet somebody who's engaging in these conversations with us, Sue.
Which is wonderful because we have no clue who's engaging with us unless they tell us. And I'm going to say hi to Ruth too, because Ruth and I are friends, and so it was just wonderful to see you guys make that connection and know that Ruth is with us. So, and I know others are as well. I just don't know who you are.
We don't know who you are, so please come to our website and introduce yourself and reach out to us and send us your questions. Sue kindly gives me her sermon to read through before we do this interview, so that's where my questions come from. So, Sue, are we ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, so, whoa, there's a lot going on in the world.
Yeah, there is.
And so your invitation to us through this Lent season was to really stop, take a breath, pause, and kind of notice where God is in this moment. And the message today, I think, is really interesting because you're focused on having us to not so pay attention to the form or how things are done, but really what's happening and what's the impact on kind of self and others. And you beautifully talk about, three different kind of examples of that. But it started with Jesus's story. So just help us understand kind of how we get tripped up into focusing on how things are done, not if we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, I think we all have comfort levels. And we all like routine to a degree. There's always, that group that says, I love change. And a lot of people actually do, but a lot of us also like a little bit of routine in our lives. We like to know, for example, when we show up at worship on Sunday mornings, we love the different worship services that are unique and not like every other Sunday. But we also like that same routine of every other Sunday, that we know what's going to happen after the welcome. We know what's going to happen after the prayer. We know what's going to happen after the sermon. So there's a bit of constancy or consistency in our lives. And we need that. We need that partially before we're able to really value what's different. Because if everything's different every day, then that in itself loses its uniqueness and its specialness. So I think the form of things is something that is necessary in our lives, and it's a comfort level. The challenge becomes when the form becomes more important than what it was intended to make possible, or uh, um, what it was supposed to mean there. And a good example is, I'll use an old joke from churches. It's like, so the women of the church are making a dinner downstairs, and they're having a pot roast there, and they always cut the pot roast in half and put it on two different pans. That's how they do it. We've always done it that way. And a new person, finally asked, "Well, why do you always cut the pot roast in half and put it on two different plates and trays?" And, well, we've always done it that way. Well, why have you always done it that way? And you go back and you find out that what happened was that originally there was a much smaller oven in the church, and the full pot roast didn't fit. And so they had to cut it in half to put it on two different trays. So there's kind of a fun example of how we have become addicted to the form of something, and we've forgotten the meaning behind it. It's like, what was it supposed to be doing? It was going to enabling us to cook the full pot roast that way. And so, you have Jesus. One of the examples I gave in the sermon, his disciples were picking grain on the Sabbath, which the Pharisees were a little upset at because they were working on the Sabbath. Well, they had become so tied into the rules about this is what Sabbath means. It means you do X, Y, and Z. That they forgot that the purpose of the Sabbath was to give us an opportunity to not worry about things, to stop, to breathe, to rest. And part of that means if you're hungry, help yourself to some of the leftover grain in the fields. Eat it so you don't, so you can actually rest and enjoy that day. But that's an example of where the form uh, made us lose sight of the meaning. And so that's why it's important for us to remind ourselves, why are we doing something? And then ask ourselves, is the form we are using to do that still helpful? Is it still meeting that need? Or are there different needs around us that are critical, that need to be met, that we don't have a form for? In which case, we will develop a form, but we don't want to confuse the form for the purpose.
Well, and you bring up in your sermon, example of the all too frequent school shootings, and that there's a conversation around, the Second Amendment versus how do we keep our children safe?
Yeah. And there's lots of background to why people are so locked into their rights regarding the Second Amendment. And so I don't want to even presume to summarize all the different reasons people are so adamant against limiting gun rights. And I said this in the sermon, and I will say this now. This is not an argument against the Second Amendment. I know many people who have many guns, who enjoy shooting, who go hunting with them, who are the first to say, we need common sense gun laws. What we have now is ridiculous, and it's putting people at risk. So this isn't saying the Second Amendment isn't important, but I think we have to ask that question. Have we idolized the Second Amendment so much that we are putting our children at risk? And I believe we are. I don't remember which state it was, but one of the states that in the last 5 years or so had a school shooting, the state didn't wait for the federal government to do anything. The state put in place bans against assault weapons. And they have seen a noticeable drop in gun violence since they put that in. They also have not had another school shooting since they put that in. And again, it's not about saying nobody can have guns, but are there common sense things we could do so that our children will be safe? And sometimes we end up worshiping our ideal of something, and we lose sight of how that hurts others. And so there's another different kind of example of how the form, my understanding of what the Second Amendment means and the threat to myself if someone tries to limit that, how that doesn't take into consideration the rights of other people to go to school and not have to have active shooter drills, not have to be afraid of being shot. Parents being able to drop off their kids at school and know that they're safe there. So, when have we started idolizing the form or the idea of something and lost sight of how that impacts others in really negative ways?
So how can we catch ourselves kind of operating in the form of something? Because, we do have, basically muscle memory, right? This is how we've always done it. And so therefore that is how we're going to do it today and going forward. I will say I'm blessed with taking care of my 3-year-old grandchildren and grandchild this weekend. And oh my gosh, he asks, why, like 5 times a minute, it seems like. And, it does make you pause, to like, well, why do we, pour the cereal before the milk?
Yeah.
But so help us understand how we can kind of catch ourselves just kind of being on automatic pilot to some degree. This is the way it's always done. to like, when are we in the form that no longer serves us?
Two things. One, I think, is when we catch ourselves thinking, well, this is the way it has to be done. Well, says who? That's a good clue that we're doing it because, well, we've always done it that way. Which is not to say it's a bad way, but that's a good hint for ourselves, a good trigger to say, wait a minute, is this the way it needs to be done? Is this still achieving the purpose that it was intended to achieve? Does the need even still exist anymore? Like the pan, we got a larger oven. We don't need to cut the roast in half anymore. So I think when we catch ourselves thinking or saying that, well, this is how it has to be done, that's a good trigger for ourselves to step back and say, is it really? What is the need this is meeting?
Mm-hmm.
And if the need is no longer there, is it meeting a different need? Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's the need for ourselves for, I need to know that one thing in my life is just staying the same. My life is crazy. It's out of control. I need to have one thing that I don't have to think about, that this is the way it is. That's not an invalid need. So let's at least be honest, though, about what is the need it's meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing we need to do is just periodically look at what we're doing. And I think of this especially for the church. Look at the things we do and just periodically ask, what is the need this is meeting now? Have the needs changed? Are there new needs out there? And so put it down on a calendar every 6 months. Ask yourself that question, especially if you're in an organization. But for ourselves personally, I think whenever we catch ourselves thinking, well, it has to be done this way, or we get defensive when someone suggests we do something in a different way, that's another good clue to us that perhaps we have started worshiping the form of something more than the need that it addresses.
In your message, you refer to, the new wine, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of, drinking the kind of the old wine, creating the new wine. And that's kind of a nudge from God, kind of like it's time to change. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of us are resistant to change, a lot of times. Mm-hmm. And I would surmise that a lot of that is grounded in fear to some degree.
Yeah.
So when we're invited to drink the new wine, to explore what works now, and our fears kind of rise up, how do you suggest we kind of not ignore those fears, but kind of like, acknowledge them, but mm-hmm. not let them kind of drive the bus?
Yeah. Other places in scripture, Jesus talks about the importance of not spending our energy on worrying about things and not worrying about tomorrow. Because that stuff can consume us and it can overwhelm us and it can stop us from really experiencing life and joy and abundance. And we have a God who wants us to enjoy life and, joy and abundance. So I think that, we need to, first of all, acknowledge that there may be some uncomfortableness, some worry, some fear involved with looking to the future. And it is unknown. There's no guarantees. But I think we can also remind ourselves that new isn't always bad. The story of the new wine, Jesus talks about new wine and new wineskins and old wine and old wineskins. It's one of the scriptures for the day. But you go back to the wedding at Cana in the Gospel of John, big party, 7-day party for this wedding, and they ran out of the wine, all wine. And typically, the best wine is served first when people aren't too drunk to notice. And then as they get more drunk, you serve the cheap stuff. Well, they ran out of everything. And Jesus' mom goes to him and says, do something. And so Jesus turns water into wine. Has it even had a chance to age for a day or an hour? Brand new. Logic says this is going to be terrible. it was the best wine anyone had ever had. We need to remember new doesn't always mean bad. Sometimes it's better than we might ever have anticipated or expected. But we aren't going to know if we don't try. We aren't going to know if we, keep hanging on to that old glass of wine and say, nope, nope. If it's not this one right here, it's not worth trying. Well, what do you miss out on when you just cling to the old and never try anything new? And, we have a God who says, I'm making all things new. I want to be a part of that. I want to try that. I want to experience that. And so I think we need to remind ourselves that sometimes new is the best. But if we aren't willing to try it, we're never going to know.
That reminds me of something I learned from my friends and colleague in Finland. There's 3 lovely women who are the co-founders of Finland's Happiness Research Association. And Finland as a country has had well-being as their strategy since the end of World War II, because they really felt that that's the only way they will maintain their independence from Russia. And so, in conversations with them, I said, how does that big, bold strategy, right, of well-being for all play out? And they said, well, it took the country a few years, to kind of figure it out. But now they use this one question to make decisions at the policy level. And this question is, how will it impact our children?
Great question. I go back to the Second Amendment for that. And this issue of guns and assault weapons and school shootings is, this is going to come across harsh, but I think that there's a segment of our population that doesn't care how things affect children. All they care about is their own right to own guns. And if that leads to increased school shootings, well, that's just too bad. And that's not going to go, that comment isn't going to go over well with everybody. And I recognize that. But let's be honest. When we are putting our own desires and needs and, sense of God-given rights above the needs of children, I don't think that's where God is. I don't. So I love that question. How is this going to impact our children?
Yeah, I mean, it's really informed strategy. Like every child in school gets 2 healthy meals a day. No signing up for food batch, just every child, 2 meals every day. The social system and the education system are tied, and so is their healthcare system. So it's all interrelated. What I've learned is if somebody is homeless in Finland, it's because they want to be, not because there isn't the system in place to support them.
Yeah.
So it's just, we can learn from others, as well as we move on here. But I just love that you're bringing the attention through your message today to catch ourselves. When are we just doing things because we haven't really taken time to think about it and the impact it has on others?
Yeah. It's that whole stop, pause, pay attention.
Yeah. So, Sue, as always, I love our time together. For our audience, please join us live stream for the sermon at 9 a.m. Central Time.
10 a.m. Central.
Thank you for that. 10 a.m. Central Time. And comment. Bring us your questions. Bring other people along in these conversations. We welcome everyone here.
Yeah, we post these both on our podcast and our YouTube channel, but we also post these on Facebook. And so that's a great place to put comments, or on the YouTube, under the YouTube video, you could put comments there. And yeah, we'll pay attention. We'll respond. We'll continue the conversation.
All questions are welcome.
All questions, yes.
Thank you, Sue. And
Thank
thank you
you,
to
Nancy.
those who joined us.
Okay. Thanks for joining us at First Presbyterian Church, where faith is nurtured, curiosity encouraged, diversity welcomed, and all are loved. Find out more about us at fpclincoln.org.